This is Super Saiyan Squeamish. Excited to bring you another Sonic Lost World stage review. This is where I play the stage, or replay the stage, and then review it, discussing or talking about the highlights, the gameplay experience, being my first time playing through Sonic Lost World, and my only experience with it outside of watching some YouTube videos back when I was like 12. With that being said, we discussed the highlights, challenges, and I guess the details overall, Sonic related, and very, very rarely do we stray off the Sonic topic, though it does happen, due to the fact that Sonic's history and fan base is very wide and creates plenty of opportunities and open doors for, well, shenanigans. I'm excited, and also slightly is the word disappointed, due to the fact that this is the last official stage of Sonic Lost World, being the Lava Mountain boss and the final boss of Sonic Lost World. Now, the one thing I want to mention, and I was going to wait, but we'll just get it out of the way right now, is there is no official super boss for this game. I'm not going to say the title again. There's no need to. Though not every Sonic game does have a super boss, which the definition of a super boss in Super Saiyan Squeamish terms is essentially usually a boss that is post-game, we'll get to that in a second, that is unlocked or, I guess, acquitted to the very, very ending, whether it be after the initial boss, not counting like a second phase or anything like that. Usually another boss encounter that shows up in the last second or unlocks after. And in Sonic terms and history, a lot of the time these super bosses are challenges that you can unlock through completing all the stages or certain requirements, and sometimes simply just, like I said, a stage that you can achieve after everything is done. These are usually the most challenging encounters out of the game, but not always, whether they have high HP pools or in Sonic standards, multiple gimmicks, fast-paced challenges, and usually environmental mechanics as well that create complex and almost always stunning and amazing visual aesthetics. Usually, but not limited to, separate visual, I guess the word would be appeal and designs from the rest of the game. A lot of the time they tend to stand out rather than match the normal aesthetic. That's not always the case. Things like, well, we'll get to those games when we get there. That's a run-along Super Saiyan Squeamish super boss definition, being probably my favorite thing out of most gaming experiences. Now, before I run your ears off, I will say that one more definition to reach, but this being the last stage and the final boss, outside of creating excuses to talk a lot, the boss itself does have numerous mechanics and methods to defeating it, as well as things that came from my experience with playing it that allow this to go on a little bit longer than the rest of them. I don't intend to clear cut this audio due to the fact that I've noticed the minimum editing has kept my fan base and no one seems to have any complaints. Though, here and there might be a gurgle or a burp. Whether that's funny to you or not, you get the drill. For things like podcasts and Super Saiyan Squeamish Future, of course, clean, crisp, sandy audio will be applied. With that being said, again, what is post-game? Before this goes into the stage itself and the lovely review, if you can't tell, I'm really excited to discuss about this boss. Being, an actual Eggman encounter and everything, and of course, a giant robot. Now, back to the definition, postgame is usually referred to as what you accomplish after the main storyline is done. Not always, but very often. Vroom vroom goes the truck. Now, not very often, but usually it is after the credits have rolled. In some cases, credits roll after post-game. But to make that definition make sense, not really. Usually it is content or levels, bosses, quests, whatever you could consider part of the game itself that is accessible after you've accomplished a win or, like I said, story completion. So in the reference to Sonic, this would be you've completed all the stages and beaten the final boss. Post-game would look like going back and getting the medals, replaying the stages for fun. In Sonic Lost World's instance, although I don't know if I'll find the time to get to it, you can unlock Super Sonic and use him in the other stages. I'm not sure if that creates extra environmental changes or unlocks anything new. That gives you something to go search up if you're interested. Now, that being pointed out, there is things like the bonus stages, collecting the Chaos Emeralds, which is something that's in, I believe, every Sonic title, outside of things like the Fighting Bean Machine and some of the Sonic racing games that I know of. Also, that new Sonic racing game did just come out. Now, carrying on, that is the definition of post-game. Again, there is no extra bosses, sadly, after completing the victory in this game. But with that being said, we're going to move on to the stage. The one thing I want to say before I carry on to letting you watch me struggle through this boss is truly an iconic and very traditional, in every sense, Sonic boss. It's very Eggman. It gives giant robot, and the cutscene and everything it does is very fitting into the environment, and it makes up for almost all of what Lava Mountain Zone didn't have. It's also a lot of fun, and it did its job in being more entertaining, but very simple in comparison to the other encounters. So I hope you enjoy. Here's the stage. Okay. With a Super Saiyan Squimish, I almost said Sonic. Supersonic's on the mind. We're not going to talk about that today. With a Super Saiyan Squimish soda. Not yet. Maybe one day. Maybe I'll make a label and just stick it on there. Anyways, now that you've seen, prepare yourself. Because I have a lot to say about this one. This probably won't be hours and hours long, obviously. But it is really something I've been waiting to talk about. So I'm going to take my time with it and discuss my experience, everything I enjoyed about it, all of the mechanics that I can remember, and just going to let this one roll out for a little bit, much like Sonic, and, the gameplay that you've seen. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention is the design. What I consider to be very Eggman and true to a Sonic boss in general is that giant robot feel and that almost sloppy yet unique aesthetic, given things like the brain dome showing, and it's kind of just like strangely built, but all of his machines are very reminiscent of each other, and that shape and almost, I want to say, wonky yet semi-functional concepts, whether it be the weaponry side of things or these shapes, really give that vibe of, okay, this is an Eggman creation, rather than the other encounters like Zoa, or things like the aliens that we've faced in Sonic Colors and the such, which you haven't seen yet. But the first thing I want to note, outside of the appeal and it being very Eggman, is the placing of, it itself and the encounter of which you face it is really overwhelmingly simple. Now, that is quite a sentence that contradicts itself, but that being said, it really makes sense, but at the same time, there not being any background aesthetic to Lava Mountain, it's fairly kind of like, okay, so we're inside a volcano or a cave or tunnel, and this seems to just go on and on and on. Like Eggman built a railway or something of that sort. It's just aesthetically questionable, if you're going to look at it from a standpoint like that, due to the fact that other Sonic bosses, especially in this variety, tend to be fought in things like a circle or in a big dome area, where you do like a rotation. This is very reminiscent of things like Sonic in the Dark Knight, stuff like that, and also, not sadly to say, but at the same time kind of, a fairly common method for fighting Sonic bosses. I don't know if I'll categorize it yet, but if I were, it would be something like a landing strip rundown. That's kind of what it feels like. This is something that, again, I mentioned is fairly common, where you're essentially chasing the boss, or i.e. the boss is chasing you, you're dodging left and right, with some other mechanics involved, and then landing the attacks. Not always, but in bosses like this, there tends to be a second phase that has less of a rundown mechanic, and more to the left and right traditional. But, that being said, overall, it being fairly reminiscent of many other fights is also a strong point in keeping it an enjoyable encounter. Now, before I'm just rambling your ears off, we'll get into more of what we've discussed in the past. Keep this more akin to the other videos, not just for myself and the sake of recording this, or the fans that are, looking down for their same experience. This being the last stage, I do want to discuss a little bit more and add some extra verbiage into it as we build up to what will be, most likely, an official Sonic Lost World review, whether it be visual or completely audio. Now, to cut the analog talk out of it, we'll just get right on into the standard. So, that being said, what you see here is, I went very Sonic in this move. It made it a lot more fun, although as soon as this boss dropped in, I was so ecstatic. Static? Equivocally? Words. I was so excited just because, again, giant robot, and I knew that it was going to be fairly challenging. But we'll just jump right in and take a look at how I went around dodging and equivocally utilizing these mechanics as a way to achieve a quick victory. Although there isn't really anything I noticed that allowed this to be done any faster than I accomplished it, outside of, for whatever reason, the targeting hitbox had some weird patterns. I don't know if that's due to what I played on, or the fact that that's just part of the challenge. So, first off, you'll notice that the goal here is get as close as you can to the boss, and then lock on from left to right or right to left. 5 or was it 6 segments, the arms, joints, and legs. Usually noted the top left and the legs would be locked on first, or the vice versa, where I would get the left arm, the legs, and then the top middle left and top middle right would lock on afterwards. Sometimes it was in a quick sweeping motion, other times it was very sporadic and random. And then you, do the most amazing Sonic move ever, turn into a ball and shoot like a rocket on the left, and then just bounce from one to the other, to the other, to the other, until you can get launched right up in the air and get that classic slam on Eggman's noggin, or in this case, the glass dome around the giant robot's brain. With that being pointed out, that is the damage cycle for this boss. Fairly simple. Kind of repetitive. I think I had to do it about 6 or 7 times, unironically so. Outside of that, what's in between, well, you've already seen. We're dodging laser beams, which have a very simple pattern. There's 2 types of them, whether it be the orange laser or whatever color the other one was. Due to the fact that I don't feel like going back to look at my own video, for whatever reason. The trick here was you can just let them do their thing and hop over them, or you can kite, or essentially just allow them to lock onto your previous location, get the timing right, and jump over them. As you've seen, I was kind of playing around with it due to the fact that I had probably 4 or 5 attempts at this boss. I think more than that, due to the lock-on just not properly working. But I started to have fun with it and play around with how close I could get the time, all for the visual appeal and that immersibility for you guys. So that being noted, it created a lot of fun in terms of just feeling like I was Sonic, dodging those lasers, and trying to get as close and stylish as I could. Now moving on to its other movesets, the most difficult out of the lasers, the drills, and the random fireballs that I think come from the volcano itself. I cannot remember. This robot really did have a bunch of tricks up its sleeve, but it was all nonetheless a wonderful experience. So as we'll get back to what I was saying, the second move that I noticed and would recognize as its most palatable and complex way of attacking was both arms turn into drills, puts them together, and it starts to create a rock pattern in the ground, forcing you to dodge left and right, although you can jump over this. Now at the same time, I do note that there is fireballs here and there, creating a little bit more challenge, and of course increasing in pace over time. Now with that being noted, the pattern shifts a little bit, whether it be lasers, rocks, lasers, then you can damage, or sometimes just 2, creating a little bit of a stumble in the speed effect, and also, like I said, not allowing you to go as fast and Sonic-y as you would like, and holding you to that pattern, which is very fitting for something being like the final boss, and, gives you that sense of, okay, this is a giant challenge. Of course it's going to take time. That makes sense. So it creates kind of an endurance battle, which isn't always the most Sonic feeling, but if this were to wrap up in less than a minute or two, it wouldn't be, well, it depends on how you feel. Not always chasing that Sonic feeling, and sometimes also just trying to get the game done, one or the other. Now, that being noted, the most ergonomically challenging thing was, and a super big surprise, was about 3/4 into the fight, after already learning the pattern and realizing that the only thing that's changing is the pace, which makes the second move with the drill hands a little bit more tricky, if I'm being honest. You do get hit by a beam that slows you down and stops you from jumping. So if you're in the wrong position or you're not paying attention, you won't be able to hop over the rock paths if that's how you were managing them before. Same thing applies with the lasers. So if you didn't exploit the possibility of options, you will get hit by that. And it is kind of difficult. Now, carrying on from that, there is a ending final move that I thought was super amazing, and it totally one-shot me without any ideas, and it was a big surprise, which also was slightly frustrating due to the fact that I was recording this, but at the same time was a nice, okay, that's a really big final boss moment that I wasn't expecting from a Sonic game, which is surprising. But already knowing that there wasn't a super boss, feeling like I had the experience completely panned out and just going for a quick victory, I was completely stunned, and it was amazing. So, with that being noted, you'll see that in the gameplay here. He puts his hands together and creates a purple plasma ball, and then there's also the giant fireball as well. But the giant fireball, you just go to the left as far as you can from it and don't get hit. But the plasma ball has magnetism. What do I think is neat about that? Not just being magnets and the color purple tied to most things gravity related in games. Not like gravity. Now, that being said, it is very, very, very tricky not to get pulled in and immediately blasted. Due to the fact that I think the radius for it, once you're in it, it is inescapable. But if you obviously stay outside of it, it's no problem. I don't know if it repeats more than once due to the fact that there was only one hit or segment of hits left after that move. But it being said prior, it being a surprise and not expecting it when I was getting almost to the victory in the first point, really created the perfect experience. It was 100% probably my biggest highlight out of it, and overall my favorite part of just playing through that encounter. Now, with that being said, I didn't add the cutscenes or anything like that in this. Maybe I will later on, but they were fairly enjoyable, and it did create that Eggman experience. Although overall the boss is fairly simple, repetitive, and I don't want to say boring, but I will, but not boring in a bad way. It overall created the perfect, complete Sonic experience, really tying in what Lava Mountain Zone should have been, but also at the same time making sense as to why it wasn't. Now, with that being pointed out, my favorite complete thing outside of the super move of this is the brain dome. Every time I look at it, whether I'm doing the thumbnails or just viewing the stage or the boss in general, it's really hilarious to me that the giant robot has a brain and it's not just Eggman sitting in there, which makes sense why that's the weak point. Anyways, I think that wraps up everything I have to say on it, mostly due to the fact that I think I just got it out. There, I talked about the highlights, what I thought about it, and my opinions on how it impacted the game itself. So, if I were to rate it as a Sonic stage, out of all the Sonic stages I've played, viewed, witnessed, etc., I would say for it being a final boss, it's a solid 7. Could be a little bit lower, could be a little bit higher, but I think a 7 fits perfect for it. Maybe a 7.7, pushing to an 8. Due to the fact that, again, it hits all those notes, whether it be, exotic enough, Eggman related, and really reminiscent of some of those classic memories, like the giant Eggbot 9000. Now, that being pointed out, I do think that it is a really good ending note for this game in general, without going too much over the top, allowing some of those other bosses to hold the limelight and shine a little bit, like Zora's dragon lasers and, well, some of the other funny mechanics, like the fruit. Now, from a personal opinion, it's a 10 out of 10. Maybe a little bit lower because I'm just a little cheeky when it comes to Sonic stuff, and I love the giant robots, and anything Eggman related is super hilarious. Although this boss doesn't have a lot of the comical appeal, it looks straight out of an anime, and I love it. Very reminiscent of some of those classic Sonic memories, as I mentioned. And I do pardon that if my voice is getting a little raspy here. This one went on a bit longer than I was expecting, for obvious reasons. Hopefully you enjoyed just as much as you have previously, and I will say that there is a few different tones and moods to this review, but that's kind of what I was going for, due to the fact that there is an emotional side of ending a game, whether it be the boss fight itself or just the experience. It's a segment of time that you have also taken to witness, play yourself potentially, and that I have taken out of my life to simply, enjoy and share. It's not always the simplest thing to do. A lot of the time I tie emotions and memories to these experiences, and that's part of the reason I share it with you guys. So, I did feel like it was one of those moments where letting the stress go a little bit and just talking about it purely was wonderful. Now, with that being noted, again, a 9.9 or a 10 feels just right. I think maybe an 8.7, but I'm not going to worry too much about the numbers, and we're just going to say that overall, I had a lot of fun with it. The surprise final attack, stuff like that, doesn't happen too often, because I'm usually aware of these things. And so it really created a surprise experience out of all of the Sonic Lost World recordings and stages that I've played, that really made sitting down and just getting it done a lot more fun than some of the other ones were. And I do want to say that being a fairly big Sonic fan, although my attention shifts from time to time, it really did hit all those boxes of, yeah, that's a Sonic move. That's a Sonic game. I get to feel like Sonic in this. And that really creates that immersive, enjoyable experience that I got out of Sonic Lost World. It felt like the perfect way to end it, and overall, I was really satisfied with it, and happy to say that I think it being a little bit iconically simple and almost copy and paste from other boss fights is its strongest point, and is what allowed me to enjoy it and create a fun thing to talk about, because there wasn't so much chaos going on. More or less, there was little things that I could point out and enjoy in the experience, like how to dodge the lasers and stuff like the rocks. And again, the surprise attack. Wasn't expecting a one-hit move. With that being said, if you're a Sonic fan, or just a fan of my voice, which is kind of weird, but I don't judge. You, obviously. With that being said, you can subscribe, share if you must, or leave a comment, whether it be related to the gameplay, my commentary, something you would like to see later on, although that could be considered a request, or maybe you've played the game and you have something to share. Maybe you're just a Sonic fan and you want to say something Sonic related. I am trying to build a community here, although the Sonic fan base is kind of scary, and I'm trying to keep the 6-7 brain rot to a minimum. Although, feel free to say what you want to say. This is a Sonic place after all. With that being said, maybe you noticed a mistake in my gameplay, my commentary, maybe something I missed, whether it be a move, a detail, something like the lasers. Since I didn't feel like going back, feel free to comment, point it out if you want to, or must, although I don't mind criticism. Same thing applies. If you're not a Sonic fan, feel free to like. Did I get that right? If you're not a Sonic fan, same thing applies. Feel free to like, subscribe, or if you're a fan of my voice, share if you must. That got a little confusing. So feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment, whether it be related to the game, Sonic, my gameplay, or maybe you've played and have your own experiences that you want to share, or just from a visual standpoint, or maybe some details I missed. Maybe you're a creator, maybe you're interested in Sonic fandom, or Sonic creation. Something like that would be quite interesting to talk about. Always feel free to leave a comment, like I said, whether it be related to any of those topics, or just simply something you want to say. Though the fan base of Sonic is fairly scary, or I'll rephrase that, the Sonic fan base is fairly scary. And I'm trying to build a community, so anything, you can say what you want. Although I'm trying to keep the 6-7 brain rot to a minimum, but with that being said, that's that. So if you are a Sonic fan, I hope you have a Sonic day. And if you're not a Sonic fan, I hope you have a day, or whatever it is you may have. That was a lot. And for the time being, that is the end of our Sonic Lost World stage reviews. I hope you enjoyed, as I've noticed your views, whether you're a Sonic fan, a fan of my voice, or just overall found yourself stumbling into this experience with me. It was a journey and a lot of fun, fumbling through how I wanted to create these, complete the game, and things like the terrifyingly terrible, but not always, audio that I'm sure a lot of you skipped for the sake of your eardrums, your sanity, or whatever it might have been. But I know some of you listened and got to enjoy that with me, though I did not listen to much of it yet. Now, that being said, I am really looking forward to diving into more Sonic, as I mentioned before, for the fans, fan base, and also just my own entertainment. Sonic's great. Well, before this rambles on and becomes an emotional mess, we'll just leave it at that. Super Saiyan Squeamish, out.
Take it easy.